All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first work session of the Education and Culture Committee for this new year. This is a work session on FY19 MCPS operating budget and grants funds categorical transfer requests. This is oftentimes a formality. We don't have anything else on the agenda but this one particular item, but did just want to make sure that we understood where some of the priorities were, as well as some of the adjustments that are being made in conjunction with decisions made at the state level when it comes to MSDE and the blueprint for innovation and excellence in education, otherwise known as the Kerwin Commission funding as well. So Mr. Howard, I'll ask you to just walk us through the packet so that we can understand all of the salient points before we make a decision on approval of the categorical transfers.
All right, thank you. So each year when we do this, we always start out with just a summary of the MCPS operating fund balance, where they ended the year, and kind of where we stand with unappropriated fund balance. So MCPS ended FY19 with a year-end surplus of $30.1 million. As you'll recall, they were asked to save $25 million for the savings plan. And the table at the bottom of the first page kind of runs through where we are and how we got there. They ended FY18 with a $31.8 million fund balance. $25 million of that was reappropriated for FY19, which left a $6.8 million unappropriated balance. $4 million of that was approved as a supplemental, was used that the council approved for the new curriculum, which we knew going in, and that's why the fund balance was higher than typical. During the year of FY19, there was a $1.4 million approximately revenue surplus, and then the expenditure surplus of $25.9 million, which gets to the year-end fund balance of $30.1 million. And then, as with FY19, $25 million of that was reappropriated as part of the budget for FY20, which gives us a $5.1 million unappropriated fund balance at the beginning of FY20. Now, if you look at the table on page 2, kind of in the middle of the page, that shows the MCPS year-end fund balance over the past 5 years, or 6 years, excuse me, as well as the amount that was reappropriated, and then the unappropriated fund balance that resulted. As we've talked about, MCPS, the Superintendent and the Board of Education have been working to bring the fund balance down each year, with the idea of trying to end the year with a $10 to $12 million fund balance, or about 0.5%, the superintendent has mentioned. However, we've had the savings plans, so that hasn't quite worked out as planned. Cross our fingers that we won't have a savings plan this year, and we'll see how that plays out. The unappropriated fund balance was a little bit higher in FY18 due to the new curriculum. They chose not to spend the money in FY18 and instead spend it in FY19. In the $5.1 million is lower than FY18. It's a little bit higher than normal. There was a couple issues that the lapse and turnover savings were a little bit higher than MCPS had projected as they went through the year. And there's also the revenue savings that was, again, unanticipated. So that was a little bit higher than normal. And, again, each year during the budget, council staff and MCPS staff work together to see if there's any unanticipated balance above and beyond what the council and the board is already anticipating to use. Yeah, and we'll do that again as we enter the FY21 budget. So any questions on that before we talk about the transfers themselves? Okay. So this year the board has requested 2 categorical transfers. The first in the operating fund is $2.65 million. Did I get that correct? Yes, I did. $2.65 million. The table on page 3 shows each category, what the appropriation was, and the year-end fund balance. As you can see, instructional salaries had the biggest balance, $17.8 million. However, that's only 1.8% of the total categorical appropriation. Typically, that's the category that has the most balance, especially if you were going to create $25 million of savings. That's where it has to come from, because that's 90% of MCPS's budget is for the people. The deficits were in student transportation, a small deficit of $480,000, largely because the MCPS was anticipating a grant award from the state that they did not receive. And then $1.8 million in maintenance of plant and equipment. Typically, that's the category we see a deficit in because you have lots of unanticipated work orders and expenditures and things like that for things that happen at schools that we weren't really planning on.
Can I stop you there?
Yes.
That was loud. I just wanted to stop you there for a moment because I think that, again, as we continue to ensure the safety of our children in schools and ramp up, whether it's testing for radon or whether it's water testing, all those kinds of things also go into that. We had anticipated that there would be some additional costs associated with doing some of those kinds of things, which are incredibly important. And so I just want to make sure that our public is aware that while we maintain our commitment to ensuring that our buildings are safe for our kids, it is going to encompass some additional funding that's necessary to do the appropriate testing and in some cases remediation in those particular areas. And so we're very cognizant of that, which is why I think, I'll just speak for myself as being incredibly supportive of those kinds of things, as well as some of the other measures when it comes to disposal and how you're doing with disposal of some of your products that are coming out of your cafeterias and others. Those are the kinds of things that folks are asking for from an environmental standpoint, that we're making a change. And so to see those things that are happening within the system is really good. We know that it costs additional money to do so, but is in the direction that we know is going to be helpful for our community in terms of their initiatives and priorities. So
I think one thing that I'll just note, that this is the category that includes both the safety and the security. And so all those safety measures that you discuss, whether it's the chemical waste removal of the chemicals that we might be using in our science classrooms, or chemicals in different parts of the building, oils and the fats, and being environmentally sound about it, that part of safety is critical. The security also, and making sure that our buildings have the infrastructure they need. And so last year we went about working with our teams to ensure that our schools had security structures in place and infrastructure in place, whether that were included the cameras in the building, whether it included changing and creating, different viewpoints and vantage points for our security staff and our administrative staff to be able to supervise students. And so the category here that went over budget went over in a methodical, planful way. We were aware of what we were doing. We were making decisions based on the safety and the security of our students. And if you look in our FY20 budget, we've accounted for the work we needed to do, because those changes occurred midway through the year. And we knew that when we developed the FY20 budget, we needed to take those different needs into account. So you'll see an increase in the current year's budget.
Then in terms of the grant fund, the board has requested a transfer of $665,000 total, and the grants fund is where MCPS budgets all state and federal grants that they anticipate receiving during the year. So at the start of the year, they kind of do an estimate of what categories they think the dollars need to be put in, and so what this does is this aligns what the actual expenditures were with what was kind of anticipated at the beginning of the year. So in terms of the categorical transfers, staff recommends approval of both the operating budget transfer of $2.65 million and the grants fund transfer of $665,000. Okay.
any objections from my colleagues? If not,
All right. So
there we go. So approved with acclamation. All right.
And then the last issue is just an update on the FY20 Kerwin funding. So as you'll recall, in FY20, MCPS received $24.4 million of the Kerwin from the Kerwin Blueprint legislation for FY20. At the time of the budget approval, based on information from the state, we categorized that all as just general state aid. Since then, the state has informed MCPS that it's actually about when you round up, it's closer to $14 million. $14 million will come over as state grants instead of general state aid. That just means that it's restricted to specific uses. I bolded this in the packet because it's really important, but the change doesn't impact the MCPS's total approved budget. It doesn't impact how the council appropriated the budget by category, because when we do that, we include both general state aid and grants in the same categorical pieces. And it doesn't require any action by the board and the council. Also, MCPS had already allocated the funds for the specific uses that were identified in the legislation, so it does not change how they had planned to or will spend the Kerwin funding. So why are we even talking about this? Because the shift will impact what we see as MCPS's tax-supported and grants fund budget totals. So next year, when we're going to the FY21 budget, MCPS's tax-supported budget will look lower than what we had approved this year. And it's not due to anything else other than the fact that the general state aid is categorized as tax-supported, whereas grants from the state are categorized or allocated or accounted for in the grant fund. So you may see some different numbers going forward, and we'll point them out. But I didn't want the first time you saw them to be FY21 when we're trying to figure out all the different moving pieces.
So I'm going to turn to Councilmember Tawando. Let me just say that one of the things that I applaud MCPS, and certainly when I had the conversation with Dr. Smith about this, is that the alignment was already there. And the commitment to focus on Kerwin initiatives and ensure that we were putting forth the best agenda that we could to really make strides when it came to serving our children who needed it the most was embraced by the board and the superintendent. And so while I know that that might not be the case across the state when it comes to how they allocated their funding, and certainly from that perspective, I think that that's why MSDE responded the way they did. So kudos to us for doing it right. And certainly will bode well for us, I think, in the future when it comes to justification for additional Kerwin support from the state. Councilmember Tawando.
Thank you. And I was going to make a similar point. I think it's important that you anticipated the alignment and the need, and also for the, as Councilmember Rice knows, I'd like to say for the millions watching at home, it's not going to be a reduction in FY21 of tax supported. We didn't change the budget. We fully funded MCPS request, and so I think that's important to state for the laymen that are watching. But thank you. Good point.
All right. Well, I think that we're all set. It was a very long meeting. I appreciate it.
Very, very
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're adjourned. Thank you very much.